She sent a picture by mistake, and the man from her darkest past replied with a message that could destroy her world. But what happens next will shock you. The night pressed down on the city like a living thing, silent except for the faint hum of Rosie's lullaby, a fragile thread holding the world together as she rocked Philip in her arms, his tiny fingers curling instinctively around hers, warm and trusting, unaware of the storm that had been his life even before he was born. Outside, the wind whispered secrets through the narrow streets, rattling shutters and carrying a faint echo of footsteps that weren't there, or perhaps were, and she tilted her phone in her hand, capturing the gentle curl of his lips in a sleepy smile, a smile that could melt the harshest winter, a smile that made every sleepless night worth it, her thumb hovering over the send button, a simple tap to her sister, who lived miles away, who didn't know the layers of fear that colored her every day, but the universe had other plans. For one wrong tap, one slip of a finger, and the image was gone, sent into the wrong hands, almost immediately buzzing on her phone, making her freeze as her heartbeat thundered louder than the lullaby she tried to hum. The message glowed on the screen. "He looks exactly like me." And Rosie's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the name beneath it, frozen in a nightmare she had tried to escape. Cameron Hale, her pulse spiking, the room tilting for a moment as shadows danced across the walls, mocking her, for he was supposed to be gone. 3 years of running, hiding, counting every second as though her very life depended on it, because it did. And yet here he was, a phantom in the digital glow of her phone, and before she could think, another buzz arrived, her hand trembling as she read. "Don't move, I'm coming," her fingers slipping from the phone as she whispered to herself, almost incoherently, "He can't be serious." But the memory of his voice, deep, commanding, unyielding, told her otherwise, for he always was serious. Every threat, every promise, every shadowed glance had been absolute. Rain began tapping against the window, a slow, relentless drum echoing her rising panic as she clutched Philip closer, feeling his small heartbeat under her chin, the soft rhythm meant to comfort turning, instead into an alarm, a reminder that he was small, defenseless, and she could not protect him from what was coming. Her mind racing with questions. Did he know? How much had he learned? Was this a warning or the beginning of something far worse? The clock ticked loud in the stillness, each second stretching impossibly long as she peeked through the blinds, eyes straining through the veil of rain at the empty street, a black canvas of puddles and flickering street lamps, her chest tightening with the sense that he was already there, unseen, waiting, and every instinct screamed at her to run. But where could she go? For every exit she had relied on for years was now a potential trap. The walls of the apartment, a cage, the windows fragile shields against a predator who knew her too well. When a sudden knock shattered the quiet, not timid, not hesitant, heavy, deliberate, echoing off the walls and drilling into her skull, making her flinch as she clutched Philip so tightly he wriggled in protest. The knock coming again, slower, deliberate, like the countdown to an execution, and then came the voice, low and chilling, carrying authority and familiarity that made her stomach twist. "Rosie, open it, or I'll break it down." Tears stinging her eyes as she whispered a prayer to no one in particular, gripping the baby against her chest like he was the only reason gravity still mattered, the sound of the knock hammering through every rationale. Elle thought until finally, trembling, she moved toward the door, her hand hovering over the lock, breath shallow, muscles ready to flee even as her mind screamed not to, unlocking slowly, painfully. Aware of every second stretching into eternity, the door creaking open, and there he was, soaked by the rain, coat plastered to his body, shadows under his eyes, still impossibly powerful, impossibly dangerous. Cameron Hale, every instinct screaming to bolt, to hide, but he stepped forward, eyes locked on hers, and she could not look away. 3 years, he said softly, almost a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a storm. You kept my son hidden from me, her heart twisting violently as she whispered, "He's not your world anymore," fragile against the force of his presence, but Cameron's gaze didn't waver, burning, searching, claiming, as though her words were irrelevant, nothing able to change the truth he had already decided, murmuring, "You think that makes a difference?" And stepping closer, the air between them thick with danger, memories, and something she refused to name, when a sudden crash from the street below made her jump, shadows moving outside the window. Or maybe it was her imagination, her pulse spiking like a drum of fear, leaving her weak in the knees. Cameron's hand finding hers instinctively, not gentle, not tender, but commanding, anchoring her against a tide she could not resist. "Stay behind me," he said, voice low but lethal. No one touches him. Her mind racing. Who had found them? How much did they know? The city outside, always her cage. Tonight, a battlefield she was unprepared to fight. The weight of every secret, every lie, every step she had taken to survive pressing down on her, and yet she couldn't move, couldn't run, couldn't breathe without him noticing. Another knock. Or was it a gunshot? Somewhere beyond the walls made her flinch, rain hissing against the glass, lights flickering, the baby stirring, sensing the tension, the fear wrapping the room like a living entity. Cameron's eyes scanning every shadow, every corner, every reflection, murmuring quietly, teeth gritted, jaw tight. "They know we're here. I'll handle it." She wanted to argue, resist, tell him they couldn't fight what was coming, but deep down she knew the truth. He always did, every promise, every threat, every whispered word of danger absolute, and the fact that he was here now, unannounced, unbidden, told her one terrifying thing. This was just the beginning. A flash of lightning lighting the room, casting familiar and terrifying lines of his face across the walls, shadows dancing, merging with the fear in her heart, gripping Philip tighter, realizing the fragile world she had built around them was about to shatter. And as the door clicked shut behind him, sealing them together in the night, Rosie whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "I'm not ready for this, but it doesn't matter. He's here." While outside the storm raged, somewhere in the darkness a promise hung heavy, a promise of pursuit, of reckoning, of a past that would not let her go, and her phone buzzed again. Another message, but she didn't dare look, the air thickening, the night waiting, patient, merciless, and watching. Minutes stretched like hours as the storm outside roared, rain hammering against the windowpane, cascading down the glass in relentless sheets. Rosie's arms tightened around Philip, pressing him to her chest as if sheer will could keep the chaos at bay. His small heartbeat thudded against her chest, a fragile drum she focused on to calm her own racing pulse, though the shadows in the room seemed to twist and lengthen with every flash of lightning. She glanced at the door again, the dark wood a barrier she was suddenly terrified would not hold. Outside, headlights flickered across the street in intermittent bursts, cutting through the downpour, and she imagined him standing there, watching, knowing, calculating. The memory of Camere. Anne's eyes from the last encounter flared in her mind, sharp and searing. The softness he had shown her in secret, the cruel fire he unleashed on the rest of the world. She could see it all again, mirrored in her mind like a warning she had tried to bury. A sudden, deliberate knock thundered through the silence, echoing off the walls and rattling the fragile calm she had wrapped around herself. It was slow, steady, like the ticking of a clock counting down a fate she could not escape. "Rosie!" the voice called, deep, familiar, impossibly close, yet somehow carrying through the walls, as though the distance meant nothing. "Open it, or I'll break it down." Her throat tightened. Her lips parted to speak, but no sound came. She whispered a prayer, breath trembling as her tears blurred her vision. Philip stirred, sensing the tension, and she held him closer, murmuring words of comfort she didn't feel herself. Each strike of rain against the window seemed louder, harsher, punctuating the weight, stretching every second into an eternity that pressed against her like the walls themselves were closing in. The knock came again, louder this time, as if testing the door, testing her resolve. Her fingers trembled over the handle, the cool metal a shock against her skin. Heart hammering, she forced herself to take a shallow breath, trying to steady the panic that had begun to rise like a tide threatening to drown her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. The shadows of the room pressed in, and somewhere outside, the storm whispered secrets she was not meant to hear. Finally, she turned the lock, each click loud enough to echo in her ears. The door creaked open slowly, and there he was, Cameron, soaked from the rain, coat clinging to his body, his hair plastered against his forehead, eyes shadowed with exhaustion and danger. He looked more broken than she remembered, yet more powerful, more commanding than ever. He didn't speak at first. He only looked, scanning the room, assessing, claiming, his gaze finally landing on Philip, and the boy's small body stiffened in recognition, sensing the unspoken tension in the air. 3 years, he said softly, almost a whisper, but each word carried a weight that pressed against her chest like iron. You kept my son hidden from me. Her stomach dropped. She swallowed hard, shaking her head almost imperceptibly. He's not your world anymore, she whispered, voice fragile, barely carrying across the room. But the look in Cameron's eyes, the fire, the focus, the relentless certainty, told her everything she needed to know. Outside, a sudden crash of thunder rattled the windows, and the shadows in the room flickered like living things. Something moved beyond the glass, a shadow too deliberate to be the wind. Rosie's pulse jumped as every hair on her body stood on end. Cameron stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them, blocking any thought of escape. He reached out, not gently, but with the certainty of a predator claiming territory, resting his hand near hers without touching, and she felt the weight of control pressing down on her, suffocating and undeniable. Her mind raced. Who had found them? Had anyone followed the message? Was it only Cameron who had come, or was the storm outside hiding other eyes, other threats, waiting for the perfect moment? The sound of rain masking footsteps, a distant scream perhaps imagined, her heartbeat drumming faster as Cameron's gaze never left Philip, never left her, the tension so thick she felt it in her bones. Then another knock. Or was it something heavier, something metallic? Struck the door. She flinched, clutching Philip to her chest as Cameron's hand finally made contact, firm and commanding on her shoulder. "Stay behind me," he said, low, lethal, carrying a promise she didn't dare doubt. "No one touches him." Lightning split the sky outside, illuminating the room for a fleeting second. Shadows twisted across the walls, merging with her fear, stretching into forms that seemed almost alive, reaching toward her, toward Philip. She could feel the storm pressing against them, battering. The windows, rattling the door, testing their defenses. She wanted to argue, to flee, to demand answers, but something in Cameron's gaze silenced her. A warning without words. A certainty that whatever came next would not bend to her will. A distant sound, maybe a car door, maybe a footstep, made her stiffen, and Cameron's head turned sharply, assessing, scanning, moving with a predator's precision. She dared not breathe, her chest tight, hands trembling, holding Philip as if sheer force of will could shield him. Every second dragged, every flicker of shadow a threat, every crack of thunder a heartbeat counting down toward an unknown fate. And yet, amid the fear, a single thought hammered through her mind. She could not escape him, could not outrun what had been set in motion the moment that message was sent. He was here, real, powerful, and unrelenting, and the storm outside seemed to echo the storm inside her chest. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face, the lines carved by years of violence and obsession, eyes locked on hers, unyielding, claiming, promising consequence, reckoning, and perhaps something darker. She pressed Philip tighter against her chest, whispering promises she didn't know she could keep, while Cameron's gaze swept the room once more, each shadow, each corner, every potential threat accounted for. Another distant noise, indistinct but deliberate, made her flinch again, and he growled softly under his breath, a sound that carried authority, fury, and warning. The storm outside intensified, wind screaming, rain slamming against the glass. But the true storm was in the room, in the tension, the fear, the unspoken history that hung over them like a weight. Cameron's voice, low and controlled, finally broke the silence. "They know we're here," he murmured, teeth gritted, jaw tight, and she felt the full force of reality press against AE. This was no longer just a threat, this was a hunt, and they were in the crosshairs. She could not move, could not speak, only clutch Philip and hope that somehow this night, this storm, would pass without shattering them entirely. But deep down, she knew the truth. The danger had only just begun. The storm outside and the storm inside were about to collide, and when they did, nothing would remain the same. Cameron stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind him, and the sound seemed to seal the room, pressing the storm of the outside world against its walls. His presence filled the small space with an electric tension, a mixture of warmth and danger that made Rosie's pulse spike and her hands tremble around Philip. Every breath he took was deliberate, measured, carrying with it the weight of someone who had seen too much and survived it all. "Why, Rosie?" he asked, voice low, quivering with anger, but layered with something far more dangerous, something that made the room feel impossibly heavy, as if every past choice, every hidden secret were suddenly standing in front of her, demanding attention. Rosie's gaze dropped instinctively. She clutched Philip tighter, the boy pressed to her chest like he were the only shield she had left against the storm she had run from, the man who had once ruled her life and her fears. "Because your love came with guns and graves," she said bitterly, her words slicing through the air, sharp and trembling, carrying both accusation and fear. Her voice echoed softly, but in the small room, it felt like a scream, a release of all the tension she had held for years. Cameron's eyes softened for the briefest moment, pain flickering behind the cold steel that usually resided there. It was a flash, a glimpse of the man who had loved her before the world had turned him into what he had become. "You think I ever stopped looking for you?" he whispered, almost hoarse, and those words made the walls shrink around them, as though the room itself were listening. Her lips trembled, her throat tight, and memories of their nights, together, of whispered promises and stolen touches, surged through her chest, mixing with fear in a dangerous, intoxicating swirl. "I thought you'd kill me if I stayed," she admitted, the words barely escaping, yet heavy with years of unspoken truths, of running, hiding, surviving. Her body instinctively recoiled, though she did not move, trapped between fear and recognition, between memory and reality. Cameron exhaled slowly, a low, measured breath, stepping closer until the space between them was no more than inches, his presence almost suffocating, almost protective, almost lethal. "I would have burned the world to protect you," he said, voice so quiet it could have been a confession or a threat, and Rosie's heartbeat slammed against her ribs as if agreeing with every word. Silence fell, heavy, thick with all the words neither had dared to speak in years, the room saturated with tension, with history, with danger that could ignite at the slightest spark. Outside, a sudden crash made her flinch, glass shattering as if punctuating the moment, and shadows stretched across the room like fingers reaching for them, dark and unrelenting. The storm beyond the window seemed to echo it, the wind screaming, rain lashing against the panes with a force that shook the walls. Every instinct in her screamed to flee, to protect Philip, to vanish. Yet she remained frozen, caught in the gravity of Cameron's presence, caught in the collision of past and present. Cameron's gaze swept the room with precision, scanning every shadow, every reflection, every corner, and she could feel the sharp pull of danger, the subtle shift of the air as if the room itself were waiting for the inevitable. His hand moved slightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, not tender, not gentle, but deliberate, commanding, marking the space between them as his, and the subtle movement made her flinch involuntarily. Another noise outside, a distant footstep, masked by the storm but precise, deliberate, caused her chest to tighten. Her fingers clenched the baby, her knuckles white against his tiny body, her breath hitching as the room felt smaller, the tension unbearable, each shadow a potential threat. Cameron's eyes never left hers, unwavering, assessing, protecting, yet carrying the promise of something she could not name, something that made the hairs on her arms stand straight. The sound of breaking glass outside came again, closer this time, sharper, like a warning or a countdown, and Rosie's mind raced with scenarios she could not calculate fast enough. Cameron's hand found hers, gripping tightly, anchoring her, warning her, commanding her silence. "Don't move," he whispered, his lips close to her ear, the warmth and danger in his breath sending shivers down her spine. She nodded, unable to speak, trapped in a whirlwind of fear, tension, and memory. Philip squirmed slightly, sensing the weight of the room, and she pressed him tighter, heart hammering as if trying to shield him from the inevitable. Cameron's gaze darted toward the window, muscles tensing, his whole body a predator sensing intrusion, and she realized he could smell, hear, and see danger in ways she could not even imagine. A shadow flickered outside the window, moving against the storm's chaos, deliberate, patient, waiting. Rosie's pulse quickened, her breath catching in her throat, and she felt the world shrink down to the small circle of light around them. The seconds stretched unbearably long, punctuated by the distant echoes of the storm, the creak of the building, the subtle scuff of movement outside. Cameron shifted, stepping between the window and her, his body a barrier, his gaze scanning, calculating, prepared to strike at the slightest sign of threat. He exhaled, low and dangerous, "Oh," and the tension in the room increased, each heartbeat a drum of fear. She dared not look at the door, at the window, at anything beyond his presence, yet every sound outside made her jump, made her small world shudder under the weight of inevitability. Her hands tightened around Philip, his warmth grounding her, yet his small noises reminded her of vulnerability, of fragility, of the stakes she had ignored for too long. Another crash outside, closer still, and Cameron's body stiffened, his instincts screaming faster than her mind could comprehend. He shifted, placing himself strategically between Rosie and the threats she could barely see, and she felt both terror and a strange, unbidden reassurance. The storm outside seemed to merge with the tension inside, rain and wind hammering the walls, thunder shaking the building, shadows stretching like fingers across the floor. Each flash of lightning illuminated Cameron's face, the lines hardened by experience, the eyes fierce, the jaw tight, and Rosie's chest constricted at the sight, a mixture of fear, longing, and recognition she could not suppress. The shattering of glass somewhere behind them made both of them flinch simultaneously, a silent acknowledgement that the danger was immediate, real, and unforgiving. She could see Cameron's hand move subtly toward the weapon hidden beneath his coat, and she felt a thrill of fear ripple through her, a deadly rhythm she had once known all too well. Every muscle in her body tensed. She dared not breathe loudly, dared not blink, as the storm outside and the storm inside collided in a crescendo of suspense. Every sound, every movement, every shadow seemed magnified, as though the room itself had become a living entity, watching, waiting, preparing to strike. Cameron finally spoke, low, dangerous, a whisper that carried authority across the small room. "They've found us. They're close." Her heart froze, terror pooling in her stomach, as she realized this was no longer about hiding or running. This was about survival, immediate, absolute, and deadly. She could feel the Nashin coiling in the room like a living thing, pressing against her, Philip squirming lightly, instinctively sensing her fear. Cameron's hand shifted to her shoulder, firm, protective, and yet the intensity in his gaze left her breathless. "Stay calm," he murmured, though the command carried a weight that suggested calm was the last thing either of them would feel tonight. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, the rain's rhythm pounding like a drumbeat of impending chaos. Shadows danced across the walls, merging with memory, with fear, with the fragments of their past that lingered between them. Her throat constricted, eyes flicking to the darkened corners, every nerve screaming that the storm was only the beginning. Lightning illuminated the room in jagged bursts, exposing Cameron's taut posture, the alertness in every line of his body. Rosie realized with a jolt that he had not just come for answers, not just for her, he had come for protection, for control, for survival. And that meant the danger waiting outside would not find a soft, unguarded target. Another crack of thunder, another shadow moving, perhaps imagined, perhaps real, sent a fresh wave of panic through her. Cameron's hand remained on her shoulder, grounding, claiming, a tether in a room that seemed to stretch into uncertainty. His eyes met hers, fierce, unwavering, and for a moment, the storm and fear paled against the intensity of that gaze. "You're safe, for now," he whispered, though she knew the words were fragile, temporary, a promise contingent on their vigilance, on their ability to anticipate every movement, every threat, every whisper of danger that the night could conjure. Rosie swallowed, holding Philip tighter, letting the warmth of his small body remind her why she could not break, why she could not surrender to panic. Cameron shifted, scanning once more, alert, lethal, the storm outside fading into the background as the room itself became a battlefield, every shadow a potential enemy, every sound a warning, and the tension between them charged, dangerous, and unspoken. The room fell into a heavy, trembling silence for a heartbeat, yet she could feel it. The unspoken history between them, the promises, the betrayals, the love that had once burned like fire and now smoldered in the air, waiting for a spark. Cameron's eyes softened briefly, just a fraction, as if acknowledging the fragile human tether that existed between them, between the ghosts of their past and the reality of the present. And then another crash outside, sudden, sharp, closer than before, made both of them freeze. Rosie's body tensed involuntarily, clutching Philip as her mind raced through possibilities, through threats, through the knowledge that the next moment could shatter everything she had tried to hold together. Cameron's hand moved to the weapon at his side, eyes flicking to the shadows, and the storm's roar became almost insignificant compared to the storm that had returned between them, unrelenting, dangerous, impossible to ignore. Cameron's hand shot out before Rosie could react, grabbing her wrist and yanking her back from the window just as a bullet pierced the wall where she had been leaning. The sudden violence made her gasp, and Philip squealed, softly, pressing his small body closer to her chest. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, every shadow suddenly a threat, and the storm outside merged with the storm of fear and adrenaline inside. "They found you," Cameron hissed, pulling a sleek gun from his coat with a motion that was both fluid and terrifying. His eyes scanned every corner, every shadow, every possible point of entry, and the intensity in his gaze made Rosie's stomach twist. She stared at him, eyes wide, heart hammering against her ribs, realizing that the danger she had tried to run from for years was now standing beside her, solid, lethal, unrelenting. Her body trembled, her mind racing, and yet her instincts told her there was nowhere to hide, nowhere at all. The sound of the storm outside was deafening, yet in the room, every creak of the floor, every flutter of shadowed curtain felt like a gunshot, every heartbeat like a warning. Cameron's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. "Cover the exits." His tone brooked no argument, and even as his hands trembled slightly, she could see the edge of controlled panic in his movements. The men he had stationed moved swiftly, silent shadows against the flickering light, their weapons ready, their eyes alert. Every detail of the apartment was accounted for. Every inch, every corner, had been mapped in a fraction of a second in his mind. "Pack what you need. We're leaving," he ordered, his words slicing through the tension, sharp as the gun in his hands. Rosie froze, her chest tightening, her mind reeling. Every instinct screamed at her not to obey, yet every shred of fear, every memory of what he was capable of, told her that she had no choice. She hesitated, torn between trust and terror, between the need to protect Philip and the crushing realization that their lives were slipping into a world she had tried to leave behind. Leaving? Yai. I think I'll just follow you again? She asked, voice trembling but filled with defiance, her eyes narrowing as if sheer will could keep them safe. Cameron's gaze softened, just slightly, a flicker of humanity, breaking through the armor of danger he wore like a second skin. I'm not asking, I'm saving you, he said, voice low but resolute, and in that moment, Rosie felt the weight of every past decision, every escape, every lie pressed down on her chest. Tears stung her eyes as she bit her lip, a combination of fear, frustration, and exhaustion washing over her in a wave that left her trembling. You're the reason we needed saving, she shouted, the words raw and jagged, spilling from her heart in a torrent that even the storm outside could not drown. Her voice cracked, echoing against the walls, carrying the weight of years spent running, hiding, and surviving on her own. Cameron froze for a heartbeat, then turned toward her slowly, eyes dark but soft, shadowed with the memory of everything they had endured. His words came out almost as a whisper, yet they carried the force of inevitability. And I'm the only one who can keep you alive now. The statement hung in the air like a verdict, heavy and undeniable, leaving her chest tight with a combination of fear, longing, and resignation. Outside, sirens wailed, echoing through the storm and the empty streets, a reminder that time was slipping away and danger was pressing closer with every passing second. The sound made her flinch, her body pressing instinctively closer to Cameron as if his presence alone could shield them from the chaos outside. And yet, despite the temporary safety, a deep, unshakable fear settled in her chest. The knowledge that the world beyond these walls had not forgotten them, that the past was alive, relentless, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Cameron's eyes swept over the room again, calculating, lethal, protective. Every movement was precise, measured, a silent promise that nothing would touch them as long as he was present. Rosie noticed the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands as he handed her a small bag. It was filled with essentials, carefully chosen for speed, for escape, for survival. Yet the tremor betrayed the weight of responsibility he bore, the danger he could not fully contain. She clutched the bag, fingers trembling, and her eyes flicked toward the windows again, watching the rain pound against the glass, listening to the distant thunder and sirens blending into a symphony of chaos. Every instinct told her to run, yet every shred of sense told her to trust him. And trusting Cameron Hale had never been simple, never been safe, never been free from consequence. A sudden crash from the street below made both of them flinch. Rosie's breath hitched, and she pressed Philip tighter into her chest as the sound of splintering wood reached her ears. Cameron's head snapped toward the noise, eyes narrowing, muscles coiling like a panther ready to strike. He motioned for her to stay back, shielding her with his body as he moved toward the window, weapon raised, scanning for threats. She watched him, heart pounding, and realized that the man she had once feared, the man whose love had been as dangerous as it was undeniable, had not changed in the ways that mattered most. His loyalty, his obsession, his relentless drive to protect her and Philip, all of it remained, raw and unyielding, tempered only by the passing of years and the hard lessons of survival. Another sound, footsteps, deliberate, cautious, too controlled to be random, echoed through the storm. Her pulse quickened, every nerve on fire, every instinct screaming that the night was far from over. Cameron's eyes met hers again, and in that look, she understood what she had always known. With him, there was no compromise, no choice. There was only survival, only the relentless pursuit of safety, and the unspoken knowledge that the past could never truly be left behind. She wanted to protest, to argue, to demand reasons, but the reality pressed down too hard. The room felt smaller, every shadow a threat, every sound amplified by fear, and the sirens outside reminded her that danger was not just near. It was inevitable. Cameron moved swiftly, gathering what they needed, every motion precise, measured, yet tinged with urgency. His hands shook ever so slightly, betraying the enormity of the responsibility he bore. Rosie followed, torn between trust and terror, between anger and an undeniable pull that she could not resist. The sound of another gunshot, distant, sharp, precise, made her jump. Rain streaked down the windows, thunder rolled overhead, and the walls seemed to vibrate with the intensity of the night. Cameron's voice cut through the chaos, low, controlled, lethal. "We move now." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clutched Philip and the small bag to her chest. The weight of every past choice, every running, every hiding, pressed against her shoulders like chains. She wanted to scream, to cry, to collapse, but Cameron's presence was magnetic, grounding, dangerous, unyielding, a force that left her powerless and yet, somehow, safe. The sirens grew louder, the rain heavier, and the storm outside collided with the storm within the room. Shadows danced across the walls, merging with memory, with fear, with the dangerous, unspoken bond that tied her to Cameron. Every heartbeat, every breath, every tremor of her body was magnified, a rhythm of suspense and anticipation that held her captive. He turned toward the door, weapon raised, every sense alive, every motion precise. "Stay close," he ordered, voice low but carrying the authority that left no room for argument. She obeyed, gripping Philip tightly, following him as he moved toward the exit, every step a calculated response to the danger pressing in from all sides. Another crash, this time behind them, made her flinch violently, the sound of splintering wood mingling with the sirens, thunder, and rain. Cameron's eyes narrowed, muscles coiled, ready to strike at any second, and Rosie realized that even with him, survival was uncertain, the night far from over. She swallowed hard, tears mingling with rain streaks on her face, heart pounding as the weight of the past pressed down, unrelenting. Cameron glanced back, meeting her eyes briefly, and in that look was everything: protection, obsession, love, danger, and the unspoken truth that the past never truly dies. And outside, beyond the storm, beyond the sirens, beyond the walls that seemed to hold them, the world waited, patient, merciless, and ready to remind them that the night was far from finished, that the ghosts of the past would not release them, and that every second of safety was borrowed, fragile, and fleeting. The drive into the mountains was long, the city disappearing behind them, swallowed by the night and the relentless rain. Rosie held Philip close, feeling the steady rhythm of his small heartbeat beneath her chin, the fragile warmth of his body grounding her amid the chaos. Every so often, she would glance at Cameron, his hands gripping the steering wheel with a white-knuckled intensity, knuckles gleaming in the dim light of the car, as if he were fighting ghosts with every turn of the wheel. The hum of the tires on wet asphalt, the soft drip of rain from the roof, and the occasional rumble of distant thunder filled the silence between them, stretching time into something heavy, tangible, and suffocating. Rosie's mind raced with memories, fears, and questions she dared not speak aloud. Every shadow outside the car, every flash of lightning, reminded her that the danger was not behind them. It was chasing them, relentless, patient, waiting for a single mistake. Cameron remained silent, jaw tight, eyes flicking to the road ahead, and then back to the rearview mirror, scanning, calculating, always calculating. His presence was both terrifying and comforting, a paradox she could not untangle. She wanted to speak, to break the silence with questions, but each word felt insignificant compared to the storm of emotion and threat surrounding them. Hours passed, or at least it felt like hours, the landscape changing from the dense, wet streets of the city to dark, looming silhouettes of trees and jagged mountain peaks. Rain streaked the windshield, washing away the last traces of light from the world behind them. Each twist of the road felt like a test, each narrow bend a potential trap. Rosie gripped Philip tighter, as if sheer force could shield them from the dangers lurking beyond the cabin they sought. Finally, they arrived at the cabin. It was isolated, hidden among the pines, its wooden structure worn but sturdy. The cold air hit them immediately as Cameron parked, the scent of wet earth and pine mingling with the tang of rain. Rosie shivered, wrapping Philip in her arms as she stepped out, and the wind seemed to whisper threats and promises all at once. "You planned this," she murmured, her voice low, almost lost in the howling wind. "You always plan everything." Cameron's gaze met hers, hollow, haunted, carrying both defiance and confession. "Not this time," he said, voice low, strained. "I didn't plan to lose you." Those words cut through her like ice, and she felt the weight of every moment they had spent. Tea apart, every memory of fear, running, and longing pressed down on her chest. Inside the cabin, he lit a fire, its glow flickering across the rough wooden walls and casting shadows over his scarred face. Rosie studied him, torn between fear and desire, between memory and the man he had become. He was both the monster she had once feared and the man she had never truly stopped loving. She could see the tremor in his hands as he arranged the logs, careful, precise, hiding vulnerability behind a mask of control. "Why are you doing this, Cameron?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of every unspoken question, every worry, every hope that clung to her heart. He met her gaze, the firelight reflecting in his dark eyes, his voice breaking with an honesty he rarely allowed to surface. "Because every night without you felt like dying." Her lips parted to speak, to argue, to demand answers, yet he turned away, hiding the tremor in his hands as he tended to the fire. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, alive with unspoken words, unresolved tension, and the haunting memory of a past they could not escape. The wind rattled the windows, a reminder that they were still exposed, still vulnerable, still hunted. Each gust of air seemed to carry with it whispers of danger, making the cabin feel both safe and fragile at the same time. Every shadow, every flicker of movement outside made Rosie flinch, reminding her that their reprieve was temporary. Cameron finally turned, his eyes scanning the room, lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary, as if memorizing every detail of her expression, every tremor of her lips, every fear she tried to mask. He approached, steps deliberate, and Rosie could feel the gravity of his presence pulling her forward, yet holding her captive in uncertainty. The baby stirred in her arms, soft coosbray, eking the heavy tension, grounding her just enough to remind her of the stakes. Philip's small, innocent movements contrasted sharply with the danger that had followed them, and Rosie felt a sharp pang of responsibility mixed with fear. She could not afford to falter. She could not allow the past to claim them again. Cameron moved closer, the warmth radiating from him in waves, dangerous and intoxicating. She could see the faint scar along his jaw, the hardened lines on his face that spoke of battles fought and survived, yet she also saw the vulnerability he rarely displayed. His hands were steady now, but the tremor beneath the surface betrayed a man who had carried far too much for far too long. The cabin seemed to shrink around them, the walls pressing in, the fire casting long, quivering shadows that danced like ghosts across the room. Each sound from outside, the wind through the trees, the distant roll of thunder, the patter of rain on the roof, was amplified in the tense silence, a reminder that the storm beyond the mountains had not yet passed. Rosie's mind raced, circling around memories of the life she had fought to reclaim, the freedom she had tried to protect. Every decision she had made, every escape she had taken, felt both trivial and monumental in the presence of Cameron's gaze. She wanted to speak, to demand clarity, to reclaim control, but the words lodged in her throat, trapped by the weight of fear and desire intertwined. Cameron finally broke the silence, voice low and measured, almost a growl. "We're not safe yet." His words, simple yet urgent, carried a threat of what was to come, a promise that the past was far from buried and that the night was only just beginning. Rosie felt her stomach knot, knowing he was right, knowing that even here, in this remote refuge, the world outside was closing in, and the ghosts they had fled were relentless. She shifted, adjusting Philip in her arms, his warmth a fragile anchor against the tension that threatened to overwhelm her. Cameron's eyes never left hers, sharp, calculating, protective. and why. It haunted by something deeper, a memory, a regret, a love that refused to die. The room was alive with unspoken words, memories, and the knowledge that survival required constant vigilance, strategy, and courage. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the air, and shadows danced across the cabin walls. Rosie noticed every movement Cameron made, every twitch of his hand, every shift of his body, and she realized he was always ready, always alert, a man trained to survive, to protect, to anticipate danger before it struck. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft sounds of Philip stirring, the occasional snap of a log in the fire, and the distant roar of the storm outside. Each second felt suspended, as if time itself had slowed to watch them, to see whether they would survive the night, whether the ghosts of the past would claim them despite their precautions. Rosie swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the night pressing down, a mix of fear, longing, and awe that left her trembling. Cameron's presence was a paradox, terrifying, comforting, lethal, and protective all at once. She realized that with him, she was never truly safe, but she was also never truly alone. The storm outside intensified, rain hammering the roof, wind rattling the windows, thunder shaking the ground. Every sound was amplified, every shadow a potential threat. Cameron moved silently toward the door, listening, alert, ready to strike. The tension was palpable, every heartbeat a drum of suspense, every breath measured, every motion deliberate. Rosie pressed Philip closer, the warmth of his body grounding her. Yet the fear remained, sharp and unyielding. She realized that the night was far from over, that danger was relentless, and that the past would not let them rest. Cameron turned to her again, eyes intense, voice breaking the silence. "We stay here until dawn. We survive. Nothing else matters." And as the fire flickered, casting its warm glow across their faces, Rosie understood the truth she had always feared. Survival was temporary, love was dangerous, and the ghosts of the past never truly died. But with Cameron here, for this night at least, they had a fighting chance. The days after their arrival at the cabin passed in a tense, almost suffocating silence, broken only by the gentle, innocent laughter of Philip. His small voice echoed through the wooden walls, a fragile reminder of normalcy amid the storm that surrounded them, a light in a world darkened by fear and past sins. Rosie held him often, feeling the weight of his warmth and vulnerability press against her chest, grounding her in ways she had forgotten she needed. Each giggle, each coo, was a brief reprieve from the constant vigilance, a reminder that innocence could still exist even in a world shadowed by danger. She watched Cameron silently during these days, careful to appear absorbed in tending to Philip or the small basic tasks of the cabin, yet unable to keep her gaze from him. There were moments he didn't notice, moments when his guard seemed to drop just slightly, and she saw the faint flicker of something almost human behind the hardness of his eyes. A smile, small, fleeting, yet real, would curve his lips when Philip reached for him or laughed at some childish gesture. It was a smile that belonged to the man she had once loved, layered beneath the armor of danger and the scars of battles she did not fully understand. At night, after Philip finally slept, the cabin fell into a heavy, almost suffocating quiet. The fire crackled softly, the light flickering across the walls, casting shadows that danced like memories and fears across the room. Rosie sat across from Cameron, knees drawn close, the warmth of the flames doing little to ease the chill of tension between them. Every glance he threw in her direction was loaded with unspoken words, every shift of his body a subtle signal of feelings he refused to voice. The weight of history hung heavily in the air. "You've changed," she whispered at last, her voice breaking the silence, carrying both curiosity and accusation. Her eyes were locked on his, searching, demanding, yet afraid of the answer. Cameron's eyes flickered down briefly, catching her lips in the firelight, before returning to meet her gaze. "So have you," he replied softly, voice steady yet layered with something fragile, something unguarded. And for a moment, The world outside the cabin ceased to exist. The air thickened between them, charged with the electric tension of old memories and forbidden warmth. Years of separation, fear, survival, and longing collided in that small space. Every heartbeat seemed amplified, every breath a countdown to something neither of them could name, but both of them felt with unbearable clarity. The fire cast their shadows close together, elongating them against the wall, merging their presence into one, yet the space between them was heavy, dangerous, and full of unspoken promise. "You still hate me?" Cameron asked suddenly, voice low but firm, cutting through the silence like a blade. The question hung in the air, a challenge wrapped in vulnerability, and Rosie felt her chest tighten. She looked down at her hands, tracing the lines of Philip's tiny blanket as if finding answers there. "I wish I could," she admitted quietly, the words tasting bitter yet honest. Cameron's hand moved slowly, deliberately, reaching across the small gap between them. His fingers brushed against hers, light, tentative, yet carrying a weight that made her tremble. The contact was minimal, almost innocent, and yet it sent a shiver racing through her, igniting a fire she had thought extinguished long ago. She did not pull away. She could not. "Then don't," he whispered, eyes dark, intense, conveying a command, a plea, and a promise all at once. She felt her heart hammering in her chest, the warmth of the fire mixing with a heat that had nothing to do with the flames. The space between them vanished in that moment, leaving only the tension of proximity, the weight of desire, and the raw, undeniable pull of a connection that had never truly faded. The cabin was quiet, yet every creak of the wood, every whisper of wind through the pines outside, seemed amplified. The night pressed in, patient and observant, as if aware that something was shifting, something dangerous yet inevitable. Rosie and Cameron sat frozen, suspended in a fragile bubble of anticipation, each second stretching impossibly long, every movement laden with unspoken questions. She dared a glance at him, noticing the subtle tremor in his hands, the way his jaw clenched as he struggled to contain emotions that had been buried for years. His eyes flicked to hers repeatedly, searching, seeking permission, seeking reassurance, and she realized he was as vulnerable as he was dangerous. The paradox made her chest ache with longing and fear all at once. The fire snapped suddenly, sending a shower of sparks into the air, and for a moment their hearts seemed to leap in unison. The sound was a reminder of fragility, of impermanence, and the real dangers that still lurked beyond the cabin's walls. Neither moved, yet the energy in the room shifted, charged, potent, as if the universe had paused to watch the two of them navigate the thin line between fear, love, and surrender. "You've been hiding so much," she murmured, voice barely audible, feeling her chest tighten as memories surged forward. Every lie, every escape, every silent night she had spent, wondering if he was dead, wondering if they would ever be free. Cameron's eyes darkened, reflecting the firelight, and he closed the small distance between them, his presence pressing against her in a way that left her breathless. "I couldn't stop looking for you," he said, voice low, roughened by emotion and sleepless nights. His fingers lingered against hers, brushing the tension out of her hands, as if his touch could erase years of fear, years of pain, years of distance. She swallowed hard, the taste of emotion thick in her throat, and felt the weight of unspoken words pressing against her chest. The shadows danced across the cabin walls, merging with the shadows of their past, stretching and twisting, reflecting moments of love, moments of danger, moments of loss. Every flicker of light seemed to echo the pulse of their hearts, the silent rhythm of two lives entwined by fate, fear, and desire. The baby stirred softly, breaking the momentary trance, and Rosie pressed him closer, grateful for the distraction, yet unwilling to break the fragile connection she had reestablished. Cameron's eyes followed her movements, dark with something unsaid, a mixture of possessiveness and tenderness that made her pulse race. The wind outside intensified, rattling the windows, sending branches tapping against the roof, a reminder that the world beyond the cabin remained chaotic and dangerous. Every sound was magnified in the tense silence, each one a potential threat, each one a heartbeat in the symphony of suspense surrounding them. She finally lifted her eyes to meet his again, noticing the small tremor in his fingers, the subtle curve of his lips, the tension in his jaw. The room felt smaller, heavier, alive with energy that neither dared name aloud. Every movement, every glance, every unspoken word carried the weight of years, of longing, of danger, of love burned raw and untamed. "You're not safe," she whispered finally, voice trembling, a statement more than a question, carrying the reality of the world outside, the storm beyond, and the ghosts that had not yet released them. Cameron's eyes darkened, and he leaned closer, the proximity making her breath catch, the firelight reflecting in his intense gaze. "I know," he said simply, voice low and deliberate. "But for tonight, we are." His words were a promise, a lie, a truth, and an anchor all at once. Rosie felt the tension in her chest ease just slightly, though the danger still loomed, tangible and real. The fire popped again, and the shadows seemed to flicker closer, merging with the tension, the past, and the forbidden warmth between them. Cameron's fingers brushed hers once more, and in that simple, fleeting contact, Rosie felt the weight of everything: love, fear, survival, and the irresistible pull that neither time nor distance could sever. The night stretched on, heavy with unspoken words, stolen glances, and the magnetic tension of two people bound by past sins and present danger. Every heartbeat, every breath, every soft sound was magnified, a symphony of suspense, desire, and the unshakable truth that for the first time in years, Rosie stopped running, not just from him, but from the way he made her feel, from the fire that still burned between them, and from the undeniable, dangerous pull of old love rekindled in the shadows of fear. And as the cabin settled into an uneasy quiet, the storm outside raging still, she realized, for this night at least, they were together, and nothing else mattered. The first light of morning crept through the thin curtains of the cabin, painting the room in muted golds and soft shadows. It felt impossibly calm, almost serene, a fragile layer of peace draped over the tension of the night. Yet for Rosie, there was no comfort in the sunlight, no solace in the quiet. She awoke to the feeling of Cameron's arms wrapped around her, strong, warm, unyielding, a presence that both terrified and soothed her at once. Philip slept peacefully in the corner of the room, his small chest rising and falling in innocent rhythm, unaware of the storm that had followed them into this fragile sanctuary. Her heartbeat was a thunderclap in her chest as she carefully disentangled herself, conscious not to wake him, but every movement made her pulse spike. She could feel the lingering warmth of his body, the faint scent of rain and smoke, and something uniquely Cameron that clung to him even in sleep. Her chest tightened with the memory of last night, a night of forbidden closeness, raw vulnerability, and unspoken desires that had left them both exposed and electrified. She whispered softly, almost as if testing the words against reality. "Last night shouldn't have happened." Her voice trembled, fragile and conflicted. The words seemed inadequate, a whisper against the weight of everything they had shared, everything that lingered between them like a live wire. Cameron stirred, opening his eyes slowly, their intensity immediately cutting through the remnants of her hesitation. "It was real," he said firmly, voice low and unwavering, yet carrying the softness that only came when he let his guard down, a glimpse of the man beneath the shadows. "And I won't pretend it wasn't." Rosie turned to face him fully, meeting his gaze, and for a heartbeat, the room was suspended in silence, heavy with tension, love, and fear. Tears welled in her eyes, shimmering in the morning light, reflecting both relief and terror. "You destroy everything you touch," she whispered, a truth she had carried for years, a caution against allowing herself to feel anything for him again. Cameron's expression darkened, the familiar shadow of his dangerous past falling across his features. Yet there was no anger toward her, only an intensity that made her chest ache. "Then let me destroy my own pain first," he said quietly, the words both a warning and a confession. It was as if the weight of the past 3 years, of all their mistakes, all their losses, and all the dangers that haunted them, rested entirely on his shoulders, and he was willing to bear it, alone if necessary. Suddenly, the calm of the cabin shattered. Voices outside, urgent and sharp, cut through the fragile morning serenity. Cameron's men, disciplined and alert, were already mobilizing, their concern tight, their tension unmistakable. "They found us," one of them said, voice clipped, carrying the weight of warning and fear. The words landed like stones in Rosie's chest, twisting her stomach with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Cameron's body tensed instantly. He rose, movements deliberate, almost ritualistic in their precision, and reached for his gun. Calmness that had been his armor began to slip, replaced by the sharp edge of controlled panic and the instinct to protect at all costs. Rosie's eyes widened as she watched him, the man she thought she knew, slipping into the persona she had both feared and loved. "You promised safety!" she cried, voice breaking, raw with fear and frustration. The weight of every promise, every silent agreement, and every hope she had pinned on this fragile sanctuary pressed down on her. Cameron looked back at her, eyes dark, fierce, and unwavering, yet softened with a vulnerability that made her heart ache. "And I'll die keeping it," he said simply, a vow heavy with certainty and unspoken consequences. She could see the resolve in him, a man willing to face unimaginable danger, to challenge every threat that sought them, and to risk everything for the fragile life and love that had emerged in the shadow of fear. Yet as he moved toward the fog-covered woods surrounding the cabin, disappearing into the swirling gray of the early morning mist, a part of her felt the gut-wrenching pull of helplessness. She could not follow, could not shield him, and the knowledge tore at her. The fog was thick, curling around the trees like fingers seeking to claim him, and the sound of his boots on the wet earth was both reassuring and terrifying. Every distant crackle, every rustle of leaves, every whisper of the wind was a potential threat, a reminder that the past was not done with them, that the enemies who had tracked them here were relentless, and that survival was never guaranteed. Rosie's heart pounded as she followed him to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass, watching him disappear further into the gray. The weight of fear, desire, and guilt press, set down, each emotion tangled in the other, impossible to separate. Her soul screamed for him, longing for the protection and closeness she had allowed herself to feel for only a few precious hours. She could not shake the memory of his words, the raw honesty in his declaration, the danger that clung to him like a second skin, and the undeniable truth that she was falling, had already fallen, for a man she could neither trust fully nor resist. The contradictions tore her apart. He was the source of fear, chaos, and pain, yet also the embodiment of security, desire, and the only connection she had ever truly known. Cameron's silhouette reappeared briefly as he signaled to his men, his movements precise and deliberate, yet there was a tension in the curve of his shoulders, a hesitation in the tilt of his head that spoke volumes of the cost he bore silently. Each step he took into the fog, each movement toward securing their safety, was a testament to the man he was, dangerous, relentless, and irreversibly tethered to her heart. Rosie's hands trembled, resting on Philip as he slept peacefully, unaware of the world of danger that had followed him into this fragile haven. The contrast was unbearable. The serenity of innocence against the chaos and tension that defined Cameron, and by extension, her own life. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to protect, to shield, yet another part of her was utterly captivated, rooted to the spot by the pull of longing and fear intertwined. The fog swirled around the cabin like a living entity, alive with threat and anticipation, pressing against the walls, whispering of enemies unseen, of dangers imminent, of choices that could not be avoided. Cameron's figure, moving like a shadow among shadows, seemed almost spectral, a ghost of the past mixed with the present, a reminder that love and danger were inseparable in their lives. Each shout, each movement outside, amplified the tension, a steady drumbeat of suspense that left Rosie breathless. She could hear her own heartbeat in the quiet between commands, in the hiss of the fire, in the distant rustle of the trees. Every sound was magnified, every shadow charged, every flicker of movement a question of life and death. And yet, despite it all, she could not tear her eyes away. Cameron was out there, facing danger, yet tethered to her heart by threads stronger than fear. She realized then that she was powerless to stop the pull, to control the chaos, or to protect herself from the intensity of what they shared. Love and sin were inseparable here, and the cost of denying it had never been more apparent. As he disappeared further into the mist, Rosie pressed Philip closer, her own breath shallow, her soul aching with the impossible combination of fear, longing, and hope. She knew that when the danger passed, if it passed, nothing would ever be simple again. Nothing would ever be safe. Yet she also knew, with an undeniable certainty, that she could not let go, that she could not deny what had awakened between them, and that the storm of love, danger, and desire had only just begun. The cabin settled into uneasy silence, the fog pressing against the walls, the wind whispering of threats unseen. Inside, Rosie felt the weight of guilt, desire, fear, and love intertwining, a web she could not escape. And outside, Cameron moved like a phantom through the gray morning, a man whose life was a battlefield and whose heart was irreversibly entangled with hers. Her soul ached for him even as terror gripped her. She knew that with every step he took, with every threat he faced, she was losing herself further to a man she could neither fully trust nor resist. And in that haunting realization, one truth remained undeniable. Love had returned, fierce and dangerous, and it would burn them both if they were not careful. The night that followed Cameron's departure was a tempest of chaos, shadows, and relentless pursuit. The wind howled through the trees surrounding the cabin, carrying the distant sounds of movement, whispers of danger that refused to sleep, refusing to release them even for a single heartbeat. Rosie held Philip close, her small son pressing against her chest, his warmth a fragile anchor against the storm of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping branch outside, made her flinch, her body taut, every nerve straining for any sign of threat. Hours passed like centuries. The fire that had burned low now flickered weakly in the hearth, casting elongated shadows across the cabin walls. The scent of smoke, rain, and damp wood mingled with the tension that filled the space, wrapping around her like a second skin. Her mind replayed the last moments she had watched Cameron leave, the determination in his stride, the fierce glint in his eyes, the unspoken promise that he would not fail, that he would return to them no matter the cost. And then, as if the universe itself exhaled, the storm outside settled into uneasy silence. Every sound was amplified now, a distant bird, the creak of the cabin floor, the soft breathing of Philip. Rosie's chest rose and fell in tandem with his, her heartbeat still tangled with the echo of adrenaline, of fear, of longing. She wondered, not for the first time, how a man could carry so much danger and yet be the center of her fragile, trembling world. Suddenly, a noise at the edge of her hearing made her freeze. The cabin door creaked ever so slightly, a sound that sliced through the quiet like a blade. Her pulse quickened, and instinctively she clutched Philip closer, whispering a silent prayer. And then, through the haze of her fear and anticipation, she saw him, Cameron, drenched, blood smeared on his shirt, exhausted but alive, stepping into the room with the weight of the world on his shoulders and the unshakable fire of determination in his eyes. Her breath caught. She ran to him, heart breaking and healing all at once, a mixture of relief, fear, and overwhelming love crashing over her like a tidal wave. Cameron sank to his knees without hesitation, pulling Philip into his arms, holding him with a fierceness that was both terrifying and comforting. "He's my redemption," he whispered, voice raw, edged with exhaustion, yet carrying an unshakable certainty. His eyes, glinting with the residual pain and triumph of the night, met hers, and in that moment, the world outside ceased to exist. Tears streamed freely down Rosie's face as she cupped his bloodied, bruised face in her hands, pressing her lips softly against his forehead. "And you're mine," she murmured, voice trembling, "if you promise this ends here." The words hung heavy in the air, a plea, a demand, a fragile hope for peace after years of chaos. Cameron's lips curved into a faint, fleeting smile, weary but real. "It ends when they stop coming," he replied, the weight of reality pressing against his words, yet carrying the same unwavering promise she had come to rely on. The firelight flickered over their intertwined forms, illuminating the scars, the fatigue, the love, and the unspoken bond that had survived everything. Rosie kissed his forehead again, trembling in equal measures of relief, fear, and desire, feeling the heat of his skin beneath her lips, the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. For a fleeting moment, the world felt still, fragile, suspended, as if the night itself had paused to honor the promise that had been forged in fire, rain, and danger. Cameron held her close, his arms a shield around both mother and child, whispering softly against her hair, "No one takes you from me again." The words carried the weight of every battle, every threat, every sleepless night, every fear he had ever confronted, and every danger he had faced to return to them. Rosie clung to him, feeling the tremor in his hands, the tension still lingering in his muscles, yet finding a measure of solace in the fact that he was here, whole, enough, alive, and determined to protect them. Outside, the world remained restless, the fog lifting slowly to reveal the first hints of dawn, a pale wash of light that touched the edges of the forest like a promise of new beginnings. Every shadow seemed less threatening, every rustle less alarming, yet Rosie could not shake the memory of danger, the knowledge that the night had not truly released its grip. As she breathed him in, memorizing the scent of rain, gunpowder, and the indefinable essence of Cameron, her phone buzzed faintly on the table. Both instinct and fear made her glance at it, but she did not move. Cameron's hand tightened around hers, a silent anchor, a reminder that whatever lay beyond, they faced it together. And then, almost reluctantly, he pulled the phone from his pocket, his eyes scanning the screen with precision, trained, immediate. His face, so recently illuminated with relief and love, went pale, the color draining as the words struck him like a blade. Only 2 words, yet heavy with menace, promise, and unfinished business. "We're not done." The cabin fell into an eerie silence. Even the morning birds seemed hesitant, the wind stilled, and the fire crackled weakly as though sensing the tension. Cameron's jaw clenched, his hands tightening on the phone as his eyes, dark and unrelenting, met hers. There was no panic, only the unspoken acknowledgement that the world of danger they inhabited would never truly leave them. Rosie felt a shiver run down her spine, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. They had survived the night, returned to one another, found fragile peace, yet the universe was reminding them that their story was far from over. And in that realization, she understood the truth that had defined their lives all along. Love, danger, and destiny were intertwined, inseparable, and unforgiving. Cameron lowered the phone, eyes dark with the weight of unspoken plans, unrelenting enemies, and unwavering determination. He pulled her closer again, shielding Philip with his body, whispering words that were as much a vow as a warning. "We fight together, and we survive together." The sun rose fully, casting its light across the forest and cabin, illuminating the trio, a man, a woman, and a child, bound by survival, love, and the promise of tomorrow. Every scar, every tear, every heartbeat converged in that moment, solidifying their fragile victory, their shared hope, their undeniable bond. And though the message on the phone lingered like a shadow, a reminder that the battles were not over, that enemies remained, that life would never allow them a perfect peace, Rosie rested against Cameron, finding strength in his embrace, courage in his resolve, and love in the dangerous, beautiful truth that they had returned to one another. The stars still watched over them, faint but unwavering, as if witnessing the promise made in blood, rain, and fire, that no force would sever the fragile, fierce connection between them. Cameron's arms tightened around her once more, holding her close, whispering into the quiet, "No one takes you from me again," a vow that carried not just love, but the strength to defy any threat, any danger, any shadow that dared approach. The cabin, the forest, the child, and the lovers existed in a suspended moment of peace, a heartbeat of safety, fleeting yet infinitely precious. And though the world beyond the mist promised challenges, chaos, and unfinished battles, inside that small wooden refuge, the truth was undeniable. They were together, alive, and bound by a love as dangerous as it was unbreakable. The phone remained on the table, buzzing faintly, a silent herald of future storms. Cameron's gaze flicked toward it, dark and resolute, then back to Rosie and Philip, reaffirming that no matter what came, they would face it as one, unyielding, undaunted, and unbroken. And in that final, fragile moment, the night exhaled, the fire softened, and the promise of love, fierce, Dan, Jero's, and eternal, held them together as the first true light of dawn embraced the world. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and share your feedback in the comments. Press the bell icon so you never miss our next emotional tale. Your next favorite story is just around the corner.